Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, Technical Evangelist at CTC, and today I want to introduce you to a fairly new tool on the BIM Manager Suite called the Family Preview Manager. We're going to go over a fairly comprehensive introduction and talk about what this tool, this free tool, can do for you. So let's quickly talk about what the problem is. So the family preview, the little graphic that shows up on a family when you're like clicking through Windows, in Windows Explorer, if you have large icons, or while you're loading a family, to me, that's as important to identify what the family is and what it's going to do for me as the family name is. There's obviously other important properties as well, but that's visually some of the most important bits there because it's my first impression of a piece of content and I get to understand what I can expect it to do. Now, sadly, Revit itself, with its previews, there's no real automated way to generate previews in Revit. It's kind of frustrating, actually, sort of. So, like every single time you edit a family, first of all, you have to do it individually, family by family in Revit. If you save a family out of a project, you may very well have to, again, reestablish those previews. It's just not super efficient. But every time you're editing it, you have to make sure that the view that you want to use as your preview is still the correct view, is active, and ready to update that family preview correctly upon save. Now, in some cases, this isn't so hard. I can do it in the 3D family by making a view that I call preview and just being tenacious to make sure that I'm always in the preview view, that I've closed other windows, and that's the view that I save from. Okay, that's okay, but in annotation symbol families or tags, those are annotations or, whatever, or if I'm in like a 2D, like a profile view or a detail view, I don't have the same sort of capabilities. It's not quite as streamlined. I have to make sure that I reestablish the view's properties. So if I need to see reference planes or lines or some dimensions, I have to turn them on and then manually turn them back off again. And man, that's tedious. So that turns into basically non-standard previews. This is something that most people will never consistently do on your corporate libraries. Things get out of control and it never goes, you never go back and fix it. And it's just kind of frustrating. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to show you specifically today a tool that will help you do this super easily. It's going to be simple. So we're going to learn, first of all, if you don't already have it, how you can get your hands on the BIM Manager Suite or this latest version that has this tool in it. We're going to walk through how to establish the rules for preview generation so you can actually make this incredibly repeatable, 100%. We're going to run some test preview generation on some active families that we're going to show don't have the correct graphics, and we're going to see that it's going to work. And then we're going to take a look at how I can implement this on all of my content across my entire library. So let's take a look at how you can get your hands on this suite. Now, first of all, to know if you have it in the first place, we're going to jump over here to Revit. So we're going to start talking live because I'm not big on death by PowerPoint. Here in Revit, you'll see that I have my CTC BIM Manager Suite pulled out here. I also happen to have the small icon settings enabled, and I do that so I can always see all of my tools. One of my tools that I have here is the Family Preview Manager, and it's checked on for visibility. You'll notice that I have it sitting right here in my free tools. If you didn't have the small icons, and you've got your free tools grouped by default, click the free tools button, and then in the flyout, you should see the Family Preview Manager. Now, if you don't have it, it's probably because your BIM Manager Suite's not up to date. So you can go into the suite settings. If you did already have it installed, you can go to About, and you want to make sure that you're at least on installed suite version 22.0.0. I happen to have a little test dev build here, but you're going to want to be on 22.0.0 to make sure that you have that tool available. You can always download the latest installer right from within the BIM Manager Suite settings here. Now, if you don't have the suite yet and you want to get it so you can do a little bit of follow along today, what I want you to do is jump up to the ctcsoftware.com website, and from there go into products, and from there you can go to the BIM Manager Suite 2022, and you can try the BIM Manager Suite free for 14 days. Now, the cool thing about the tool we're talking about today, it is 100% free anyway. So it will always be free. But you can try the remainder of the suite free for 14 days, and then this tool will continue to work after. But you register for that, you get the download, you install it on your Revit, and then you can kind of follow along a bit with what I'm doing today. All right, so in the CTC BIM Manager Suite, I have the Family Preview Manager. Now, let's first identify some of the problems that we're going to have. So I'm going to go ahead and do an insert load family here. And let's go browse for something. Now I have on my desktop a little collection of content where I want to go through and take a look at some of the stuff inside of here. So let's go to annotations, let's go to architectural, and yeah, I prepared this so you can see exactly what I'm going to see. Well, I'm going to see what I'm going to see. You might see something a little bit different. Notice how some of these, when I click through, they've got acceptable previews. They're pretty good. Sometimes when you get to some of these annotation symbols, though, you see something like this, right? And this is where that name becomes important, door tag CTC and door tag. Like this might be a custom one for a project or something. There's a lot of reasons why you might have some duplication in here. Maybe it's different clients, and I want to identify visually what the differences are. But I can't see anything because I've got these huge reference planes out there and it looks like trash. I can keep going. There might be some others in this list. I don't remember exactly, but some of these look better than others. But I want them all to be fairly consistent. Similarly, if I was to go into let's see, doors here, right? In my doors library, there's sometimes backup saves, and sometimes these backup saves, you can see here, the actual family has some trash preview of a plan view with all kinds of reference planes and lines. This tells the end user nothing. It just gives me a name, and that's all I have to go on at this point. I'd like to see if it's the sliding door I think I'm getting. Now, the old original preview is still here, thankfully. I can go back and reference that, but usually we would clean up our directories here and we wouldn't actually see these, so the end user's left with, you know, this trash preview that doesn't give them much. So how do we fix this? How do we set this up? Well, I can click through my previews one by one, but that really isn't very efficient. So instead, let's just set up some rules for how we want things to look and then tell this system to run on those rules. So this is where the, hang on, cancel, I'm not loading anything. The Family Preview Manager comes into play. So when I open up this tool, Family Preview Manager, there is basically not a whole lot here on the main screen other than adding some files to batch through and update the previews on, or folders, or removing certain things. I can tell it to overwrite the original family, or I can save the family to a new location. That works well. And I can process, but the real magic happens in the options. So let's go take a look at those, because this is where you establish the rules. Let's jump back here to the PowerPoint for a second. This is where you can establish the rules for the repetition here in the preview generation. And then you can run a test on some families, and then you can basically implement this across all your content. We'll take a look at how that works here in a minute. But first, let's just establish some rules. So here inside of options, in the options, there's some basic things like remember where the window was and cleaning up backup files, which personally I always do. I hate getting those little .001 files after I've processed a bunch of stuff, so I always clean it up. But down here, all right, this is where the magic is, general settings and appearance settings. You can establish a view in the families that this tool will generate for you and add to your families where appropriate. And you can call it whatever you want. Some people like the term preview. Some people want to prefix or suffix that view. Like I sometimes will put my corporate name, CTC preview. You name it. You do whatever you want. The default here is just preview, but you can change that name if you want to. Visibility settings here get inflicted on every single family, regardless of if it's 3D, 2D, annotative, or if it's a detail or whatever. It will always do sort of these kinds of things when relevant. So I like to set the preview here as my active view. So it will not just make the view, but it sets it as active. So when I open the family and go in, that's also the view that I will get. Now it won't make a preview view in annotation families and a couple of others because you can't. But in most other families, I'll have that view made, named, and I'll be in the view. That way in the future, I can make sure I go to that view. It'll be the default I open to, and it'll be the default I save with. There's also a bunch of other options like enabling preview visibility. In 3D families, or even annotation families, when there's certain things that are turned off or on, there's a little button on the bottom little view control bar that lets you see what you would see in a project with the active settings. Now, if you've got a lot of annotation options to turn things off or on, the symbol can look real muddy in the view, but if you enable the preview visibility, it looks far cleaner. Just make sure you've got a nice type set as your default so that a person can see a bit of what that's going to look like. And there's a number of other options as well, like show dimensions, reference planes, and lines. These are things that I always have turned off in annotation, actually pretty much every family. In fact, these are exactly the settings that I would recommend you use. Turn off all the things because you probably don't want to see most of this. Some of you in lighting may want to see light sources, probably not. Some of you may want to see some things like flip controls, probably not. It's up to you. I personally turn these all off because I don't want to see them in a graphic preview of a family, but you can make your own choices. Also, there's an option here for imported elements. If a lot of your geometry is made up with imported CAD geometry, which again, I personally don't recommend building families that way because it's sort of a dirty way to build families in many cases. It makes them very heavy. But if that's how your families are built or how some of the graphics of some of your content is generated, that's fine. If you want that graphic to show up in your previews, you have to make sure show imported elements is enabled. Otherwise, won't work. Okay. All right. So with this now, what I'm going to do also is take a look at some of the more advanced appearance settings here, that will control quite a bit more about the 3D geometry and some of the non-annotative 2D geometry as well. So in this window here, the appearance settings, my default appearance is for anything that's over here on the left-hand side where I haven't specified something special. I'm going to do probably a 3D right front top where applicable. I like showing my content generally in a realistic display so I can actually see the materials. Some of you might not like the realistic and you want to use something like constant colors, or maybe you like realistic with edges. That's perfectly acceptable for default representation. That's up to you what you want to do. Shaded, whatever. You make your choice of what you want to see. Hidden line, up to you, okay? You can also choose your detail level here, okay? With the detail level, you can choose coarse, medium, fine. Those are the 3 default detail levels, and this will be applied to all content, again, with the default appearance. You also can choose your display units for the content, and that specifically sort of relates to the view scales. Those of you who are not in the US probably doing a lot of your work in metric work, and you'll probably want to leverage the metric scales. And these metric scales, or these scales in general, are important to help get the correct line weights when you're doing something with line weights, like edges, realistic with edges, or when you're doing 2D style views or things like that. So you're going to want to make sure you sort of play with these, know what looks good from a preview point of view, because if I choose like 1:1, my line weights might be super tiny. If I choose something like 1:400, I might have ridiculous huge line weights, and that might not work very well. So I kind of settle here generally on 3 inch equals a foot, sort of a 1:4 style scale pattern. That looks okay. There's a few others that sometimes I use. Now, this is great for general type use, but what if you want something special to happen for something else? Like 3D right front top is good, except for when I'm doing like ceiling hosted objects, because those are modeled upside down. And I might want to look from the bottom of those. So you can see here, I've made a special appearance template called ceiling hosted. I made new on here and I gave it a name, some name, doesn't matter what you call it, it's up to you. If I could spell, that would be great. There we go. I could tell it in this to like disable preview generation of certain categories. Like don't generate previews for these things. Just leave them as they are. If you come across a family of this category, don't touch it. Or maybe I want to do preview generation, but I want to use a specific view orientation, like for doors. Maybe I want to do always elevation back if I'm doing a door family. And maybe, with this, it will also, because of my general settings, it'll turn off the hosted wall, but it'll give me an elevation back orientation instead of a 3D right front top orientation. Or maybe I want to, for ceiling hosted objects, do something like 3D right front bottom. So it looks from the bottom up at the object so I can see what it might look like suspended from a ceiling from my normal perspective, standing on the floor. And again, I can choose things like what display style, detail level, view scale I want on that object, whatever. So in my case, I made one for detail items. I wanted them to use a different scale. If I edit this, you'll notice I'm using 1.5 inches = a foot. I find that works okay. You might not like that, you might, it's up to you, but I like this one, and it uses the view plan floor, or plan view floor representation. Realistic is irrelevant. I probably would do hidden line, actually, with a fine detail level. And then I put into here detail items. There was a detail items listing over here on the left, and I added it to this list. Ceiling hosted objects here. With this one, I've added all of my ceiling hosted categories that I pretty much would care about. Like if I had a window in a ceiling, for example, it would use this 3D right front bottom representation for that object. What's probably more likely going to be in there is air terminals and lighting fixtures and devices and things like that. But I've added all the categories that are ceiling hosted specifically. You might notice over here I've got some plus signs in front of some of these categories, and that's because it's not just the category, but the hosting type of that category as well, right? I don't have to put everything into a specific appearance template. Again, most of these are probably going to work just fine using my default appearance. But when I had something special, like my wall-hosted objects, wall-hosted devices are always modeled backwards. So I like this being 3D left, back, top. That was my orientation that I wanted to use, with realistic and a fine detail level and whatever its scale was. And you can see I've got doors that are wall-hosted in here. If I go over to doors, there are plenty of bits of hardware that I have that are unhosted, or that might be hosted to some other object. That's fine. They're just going to use the default settings. But when it finds a wall-hosted door, it'll use these settings right here. So with these settings, I can save these to a network location or wherever. And I can also then reload them. So if I have special collections that I wanted to use for certain categories where there's some subcategories, I can do that. I can create like a special air terminals specific processor, and then make sure that I'm only processing air terminal stuff. The rest of my settings would be irrelevant because I would use that only when processing air terminals, right? So you can carefully manage this if you want to. Personally, I would just have a general settings collection and keep my life simple, so I'm not micromanaging that every single time. But you can do whatever you need to. The tool has the flexibility for that. All right, so now that I've made those settings and those settings are saved, it's time to test this out. Now, initially, I would probably process like an active family document if I had an active family document. If I don't have an active family document, then I'm just going to go ahead and add some files, individual files. In my case, again, there's a desktop folder that I had set up out here, and I've got an annotation from that architectural area. So I've got like the door tag, the one door tag. You can see its preview is terrible. I could add another file here, which might be the door or whatever. Maybe I have a few things that I want to add just so I can sort of test this out a little bit. What was that one? I think it was door, double glass and double sliding. I don't remember which one it was, but I'll add them both. Okay. Oh yeah, it was this sliding one here. The double glass will be updated as well anyway, because it's an elevation view and my settings are realistic in 3D from the left back top with whatever scale it is. So I can simply process these three, and I can tell it to overwrite the families, or sometimes what I'll do until I know my settings are the way that I want them is I'll save them into a new location. So like here on my desktop out here, I'll make a new folder. I'm going to call this test family preview managed families. I don't know. I didn't think of the name ahead of time, but we'll just kind of use that folder. Okay, that's where they're going to be saved into, so I can go to that one location real quick when I do this processing. So I'm going to run process. By the way, you want to be sure you're using the correct Revit version for this, because it is actually opening and saving the families and creating stuff inside of them. Okay. With the Family Preview Manager here, you'll notice that it did this incredibly quickly. This process, super, super fast. So what I'm going to do now is let's go to Windows Explorer and let's go take a look at my desktop, and let's take a look at the test family preview managed families, and let's go to sort of a large icons, extra large icons view. Hey, look at that. So now my two doors, one was elevation before and one was a plan view, and they're both looking basically the same with the wall turned off around it. Well, the trim on these doors is kind of stupid, but well, they're out of the box doors, so whatever. my door tag here, instead of having the big reference planes out there, now looks like a door tag should look. Well, that's fantastic. So I was able to very quickly validate my settings are what I want. They look pretty good. I could have also processed some detail items to make sure the scale was sort of what I was hoping for, you know, whatever, you name it. But these previews don't look bad. They look fairly good. Now I can go in and go to the next step, which is to process a ton of stuff. So let me remove all. I'm going to overwrite the original families now when I actually process this. And maybe I want to just process, you know, a whole ton of content out of this like preview generator folder. Now I've only got 4 categories here, but I can simply click OK, and it'll go recursively scan through those folders and, you know, build, you know, a whole list of the content. And it'll show me the current previews, and some of them are okay, and some of them aren't, like this generic element, whatever this thing is here. I don't even know what this is. Annotation, generic element. Yeah, it's got some reference planes, and I don't want that. Some of these other things like have these orange lines. They're probably invisible lines. I probably don't want that, you know, whatever. I can scroll down and just kind of see what the current previews all look like. There's a couple of those trash ones, the door tag, the 2 door tags there. If I go down away, a lot of these have, you know, different graphics that are sort of trash in there, and I want to fix all of them. I didn't even know that all these were bad, because I didn't go click through each one by one, but I can see real quickly just kind of scrolling that some of these are just silly representations. And there's a lot here. Now, I'm not going to make you sit through watching this process because that's not entertaining by any means, but if I was to click process right now, I would just let it run and probably go grab some lunch. And then by the time I get back, it'll probably be finished with however many families are in this list. But it doesn't take that long to get this set up and then to batch through a bunch of pieces of content. Now, I did see one question that came in quickly here that I want to answer directly. It was one of the last questions that I saw pop into the window while we were going through this. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to open up one of those families here. So let's open up this double sliding family. Now, if you remember my settings, I told it to create a view called preview and to set that as the view of my family. Now, it didn't actually open to that view. It opened to ground floor, but it did make me a preview view, set that, and made my preview from it. So here is the preview view that the tool made for me with the settings that I asked it to make. So yes, if the family can support the view type that I'm telling it to make, it will make it. It will try to set it if it can, and then that will become the actual preview. So here you can see this is using a realistic representation, not with edges, just realistic. And it probably has, you know, whatever the scale was I told it to leverage, and but the view does exist in my 3D views. Yep. So, and then that way I can use that view from this point forward whenever I'm making previews on into the future.